The laughter hit him harder than the desert wind. It rolled through the hangar, sharp and mocking, bouncing off the steel walls like shrapnel. Colonel Hayes stood with his arms crossed, the thin line of a smirk curling under his mustache. "Why don't you show us how it's done, old man?" he said. His voice was casual, but everyone heard the poison under it. Around him, a circle of younger officers tried not to laugh too loudly, their eyes darting between authority and discomfort. Sergeant Major Daniel Cole, 62, stood motionless in the center of that laughter. His body was a map of wars. Scars stitched across sun-darkened skin, bones healed crooked, and a posture still straight despite the weight of decades. He had come that morning only to deliver paperwork, nothing more. But when the colonel saw him lingering near the Apache flight line, a cruel idea took root. "Let's see if he still remembers which way the stick goes," Hayes had said. The others chuckled. Cole's eyes drifted to the R-64, Apache resting under the light, the same aircraft he had once flown with the precision of a heartbeat. It had been 15 years since his hands last wrapped around its controls. 15 years since he'd buried his co-pilot in the red dust of Kandahar. His silence filled the hangar like a slow tide. "Come on," Hayes urged, still smirking. "Just a quick run, for old time's sake." There was mockery in the colonel's tone, but also challenge. The kind that cut deeper than insults. Around them, a few of the younger soldiers shifted uneasily. Chase. They had heard stories about Cole, the veteran who had once guided a damaged Apache back to base after losing hydraulics mid-flight, saving a platoon trapped below. But legends faded fast in places where youth believed it owned the sky. Cole's jaw tightened. The sun outside sliced through the hangar door, painting the floor in blinding white. "If that's what you want, Colonel," he said finally, his voice steady, almost gentle. There was no defiance, only something quiet, unspoken, and infinitely heavier. For a moment, even Hayes looked uncertain. But pride, the old stubborn military pride, drove him forward. "You heard him, boys. Let's fuel the bird." Minutes later, the hangar roared to life. Mechanics moved around the Apache, double-checking systems with nervous glances. The smell of aviation fuel filled the air. Sharp, metallic, intoxicating. Cole stepped forward, pulling on the old helmet that someone had fetched for him. It didn't quite fit. Time had changed the shape of his head, but not his eyes. They were still the same cold blue that had once scanned enemy terrain with unshakable calm. He climbed the ladder slowly, every movement deliberate. The crew stood back, unsure whether to salute or look away. When he settled into the cockpit, something inside the hangar changed. The laughter was gone now, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Even the colonel's grin faltered. Cole's fingers brushed the console. Familiar metal, familiar ghosts. He closed his eyes for a second. He could almost hear the voice of his old co-pilot, Sergeant Blake, the young man who never made it home. "Ready when you are, sir," Blake had said once, before everything went silent. Cole's eyes opened. He turned a few switches, and the Apache stirred. The rotor blades began their slow rotation, slicing the air with the patience of something ancient and alive. The wind whipped through the hangar, carrying dust and memory. The old veteran's expression didn't change. Outside, the desert stretched endless and gold. The base crew stepped back, shielding their faces from the storm of sand. Hayes watched, half amused, half apprehensive. "Don't crash, my bird," he said. It was meant as a joke, but the words trembled slightly. Cole didn't reply. The Apache lifted gracefully, perfectly balanced. Not a tremor, not a mistake. The engines screamed to life, echoing across the base. Soldiers stopped what they were doing, watching in stunned silence as the old man guided the machine like a conductor leading an orchestra of thunder. Up above, the sunlight caught the edges of the blades, turning the chopper into a spinning halo. Cole's breathing slowed. The years fell away. In that moment, he wasn't 62. He wasn't retired. He was alive, utterly, dangerously alive. But what he saw was mastery, precision, grace. Then Cole banked the Apache hard left, rolling into a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible at that altitude. The ground crew gasped. Hayes took a step forward. "What the hell is he doing?" he muttered. But Cole wasn't just flying. He was remembering. Every movement of the stick was a memory carved into muscle and grief. He pushed the helicopter higher, the horizon bending beneath him. Below, the base looked small, fragile. Inside the cockpit, his hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from feeling. The old rage that had slept for years began to stir. He thought of the men who had been forgotten, their medals buried in drawers, their names mispronounced at parades. He thought of how this colonel, with his polished boots and empty smirk, had mocked all of them in one careless breath. The Apache roared across the sky. Then, as if the heavens themselves held their breath, Cole pulled the bird into a controlled dive, straight toward the hangar. The soldiers scattered, shouting. The colonel froze. The chopper hurtled closer, blades screaming, sand exploding outward. For an instant, everyone believed they were about to die. And just when the sound reached a deafening pitch, Cole leveled out, the helicopter slicing over Hayes's head by mere feet. The force of the downdraft threw the colonel to the ground, his cap flying into the air like a white flag. The Apache hovered there, steady and majestic, its shadow swallowing him whole. In that silence, that heavy, holy silence, no one laughed. The dust settled slowly, coating the colonel's uniform with a fine layer of shame. The soldiers stood frozen, the echo of the rotors still trembling in their chests. Above them, the Apache hovered motionless, its presence like a storm that refused to move on. Hayes scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. His authority, his image, lay shattered in the dirt. For the first time in years, the colonel didn't know what to say. He could feel the eyes of every man and woman on base burning into his back. The old veteran had become something mythic in the span of seconds. Cole guided the helicopter gently toward the runway. Every motion was precise, reverent. When the skids kissed the tarmac, it was as if the earth exhaled, the rotors slowed, and the monstrous power fell silent. The soldiers broke into applause, hesitant at first, then unstoppable. Some cheered. Others simply stood in awe, tears glinting in the hard sun. Even the younger pilots, the ones who had rolled their eyes at the old days, couldn't look away. Hayes's face tightened. His pride screamed louder than the engines ever had. He turned on his heel and strode toward the landing pad, each step fueled by humiliation disguised as anger. Cole sat still in the cockpit for a long moment. He didn't look triumphant. If anything, he looked mournful. His hands rested on the controls, as if they were the hands of an old friend he had just said goodbye to. When he finally stepped out, the applause only grew louder. But he didn't raise his arms or smile. He walked past them all, eyes distant, lost somewhere in the dust and memory. "Sergeant Major," Hayes barked, trying to reassert command. But his voice cracked. Cole stopped, turned slightly. That stunt could have gotten someone killed. Hayes snapped. The veteran looked at him, calm, unblinking. "I never miss, Colonel." The words were simple, but they struck harder than any threat. He walked away, the wind pulling at his faded uniform. The crowd parted, reverent. Hayes stood there, fists clenched, every fiber of him screaming to regain control, but there was no control to be had. The old man had taken it all, and done it without a single insult, without a single ounce of rage, just truth delivered at altitude. That night, Hayes couldn't sleep. The image of the Apache diving toward him replayed endlessly, that single terrible moment where he thought he was about to die. But worse than the fear was the shame, the realization that he had mocked a man who had done everything he only pretended to understand. He sat in his quarters, the desert night pressing in like judgment. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled. The base slept uneasily. Cole, meanwhile, sat alone in the mess hall, his tray untouched. The lights hummed softly above him. He wasn't thinking of the colonel or the applause. He was thinking of Blake again, his co-pilot's laughter echoing in the memory of endless skies. He had not meant to humiliate anyone. He had only wanted to remember what it felt like to be alive, to feel the pulse of the machine that had carried his soul through fire and loss. But perhaps, he thought, some truths reveal themselves only through confrontation. When dawn broke, the colonel's resignation letter was already on the general's desk. No one knew exactly what had been written, but the message spread through the ranks like wildfire. Respect cannot be commanded by rank, only earned by honor. Cole left the base that same morning, walking away into the burning horizon. The desert wind swallowed his silhouette, leaving behind only stories, the kind that don't fade. The colonel's office was quiet now, stripped of all sound but the slow ticking of the wall clock. Its rhythm was merciless, each second like the closing of a cell door. Hayes sat alone behind his desk, the resignation letter still unsigned, the paper trembling faintly beneath his hand. Outside, the base carried on with muted routine, but he could feel it. The way conversations stopped when he entered, the way eyes avoided his. Respect, once automatic, had turned to pity. He tried to tell himself it wasn't his fault. He told himself that he had only meant to test the old man's nerve, to share a moment of light-hearted jest. But the truth, relentless and cold, gnawed through the excuses. It hadn't been a joke. It had been contempt. The easy cruelty of a man who had never faced the kind of fear Cole had lived with every day. He poured himself a drink. The amber liquid trembled as it hit the glass, catching the morning light like a flame. His reflection wavered on its surface. A man with perfect medals, perfect posture, and nothing behind the eyes. He lifted it to his lips, but the taste was sour. When the knock came, he nearly jumped. "Come," he muttered. It was Captain Reeves, young, steady, loyal to the chain of command, but shaken since the day before. "Sir," he said quietly, "the general wants a word about your report." Hayes's eyes flicked to the file on his desk. The report was blank. He had sat up all night trying to write it, but the words refused to come. What was there to say? That an old veteran had done what no one else dared. That the colonel had mocked him into flight, only to be grounded himself by shame. "Tell him I'll have it ready," Hayes said. His voice was low, brittle. Reeves hesitated. "Sir, may I speak freely?" Hayes looked up, something dark flickering in his expression. "Go ahead, I was there," the captain said. "I saw what Cole did. He wasn't showing off. He was reminding us, all of us, what this uniform means." Hayes said nothing. The captain's words hit too close, too honestly. When Reeves left, the silence returned heavier than before. Hayes turned his chair toward the window. The airfield shimmered in the heat, and in the distance, mechanics worked around the same Apache that Cole had flown. It stood there like a monument now, silent, immense, untouchable. He remembered Cole's face as he'd stepped out of the cockpit. No pride, no anger, just sorrow. That look had haunted him through the night, because behind it was something Hayes had never shown, grace, the kind that came from surviving more than just war. Later that afternoon, he found himself walking toward the flight line without meaning to. The soldiers standing guard stiffened, saluting him out of habit, but he saw it, that faint hesitation, that quiet doubt. He ignored it and kept walking until he reached the Apache. The desert wind hummed softly against the metal hull. He placed a hand on it. It was still warm, even after hours in the sun. He tried to imagine what it had felt like for Cole, sitting in that seat, the vibration of power beneath him, the endless sky ahead. It was more than machinery. It was memory, grief, defiance all at once. "Colonel?" One of the young technicians called out. Hayes turned slightly. "Yes." The boy looked uneasy. "Sir, we were wondering if Sergeant Major Cole will be coming back." Hayes hesitated, then shook his head. "No, he's done flying." The young man nodded, but there was disappointment in his eyes, the kind reserved for heroes who disappear before their time. A few soldiers whispered over coffee, retelling the story in half-truths and wonder. They spoke of the old man who had flown like lightning, who had turned mockery into silence, who had made a colonel bow without ever asking him to. Hayes ate alone. Every laugh that rose from the room twisted in his gut. Every mention of the old veteran felt like a blade, but still he listened. He needed to hear it, the way legends begin. When he finally left, the desert sky was violet and dying. The stars were just beginning to appear, sharp as the edges of memory. He walked toward the barracks, but his feet slowed near the edge of the tarmac. The Apache loomed there again, its silhouette black against the horizon. He stood for a long while, staring, and in that silence the memory returned. The way the helicopter had descended, unstoppable, terrifying, and yet impossibly beautiful. It hadn't been an act of revenge. It had been a lesson. The next morning, the base woke to news that Hayes had filed his resignation. No speech, no ceremony, just a brief message to command, and a quiet departure before sunrise. But before he left, he placed something on the seat of the Apache. His own insignia, polished and gleaming, the symbol of rank that had once meant everything. Beneath it, a note written in a hand that trembled just enough to show honesty. For the man who reminded me what honor actually looks like. When the ground crew found it, they stood in silence. No one touched it. The story had already begun to write itself into the air around them. Far away, miles beyond the desert's edge, Cole sat in a quiet diner overlooking the highway. The smell of coffee and oil filled the air. He watched the sun climb slowly over the horizon, his reflection faint in the window, older, lined but lighter some. He didn't know that the colonel had resigned. He didn't need to. He had seen enough men to know that sometimes the greatest victories are invisible. He stirred his coffee, listening to the hum of the world, trucks passing, a radio whispering some old country song. The war in his head had quieted, and for the first time in years, Daniel Cole allowed himself to smile. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. Across the base, across every outpost and training ground, soldiers whispered it like scripture. They said the old veteran had flown, as if guided by something sacred, as if the sky itself had been waiting for him to return. Some said the colonel's resignation had been forced, others that he'd chosen silence over pride. But everyone agreed on one thing. That day had changed the air around them. The laughter that once came easily had grown quieter, more thoughtful. At headquarters, Cole's name resurfaced in old files, medals he had refused to collect suddenly being discussed again. The general who received Hayes's letter read it twice before folding it carefully, his face unreadable. He didn't order an inquiry or an apology. Instead, he signed a single document and sent it down the line, an official commendation reinstating Sergeant Major Daniel Cole as honorary flight advisor, retired. It was a small gesture in paper form, but something much larger in spirit. Cole never knew. He had settled into the rhythm of small-town quiet. He rented a room above a mechanic's shop, the kind of place where the scent of gasoline mixed with rain and old wood. Every morning, he walked the same dusty road to the diner, nodding at faces that didn't know his name. He liked it that way. The waitress, a kind woman with a tired smile, always poured his coffee before he asked. "You used to be military, right?" she said once, half curious. He nodded. "Long time ago. That explains the way you sit, like you're guarding something," she teased softly. "Habit," he said, and smiled faintly. But some nights, when the air cooled and the sky turned black, he would find himself looking up, searching for that same hum, that same rush of power and wind that used to define his heartbeat. He didn't miss the war, he missed the purpose. The sound of rotors cutting through the night had been more than noise. It had been a rhythm, a pulse reminding him he still belonged somewhere above the earth. Back on base, Reeves found the colonel's insignia still resting inside the Apache. No one dared remove it. Instead, they sealed it inside the cockpit, where it caught the light like a relic. Cadets saluted it before flight. It became an unspoken ritual, a moment of respect, not for rank but for humility. Months later, Reeves drove out to the little town where Cole had settled. He didn't call ahead, didn't plan what to say. He found him sitting outside the diner, sipping coffee, a newspaper folded neatly on the table. "Sergeant Major Cole," Reeves said, hesitating. Cole looked up, eyes calm, a faint squint against the afternoon glare. "Captain," he greeted, as if expecting him. "I came to thank you," Reeves said. "Not just for what you did that day, for what it meant." Cole tilted his head slightly. "Did it mean something?" Reeves sat down. "It changed everything. The men talk about you, about how one act of courage reminded us that respect isn't something printed on a badge." Cole looked away toward the horizon. "I didn't do it for them. Or for him," he said. "I did it because sometimes silence becomes too heavy. You carry it long enough, and it either crushes you or you make it fly. Reeves let the words hang there. The two men sat in easy quiet, the world moving slowly around them. The sound of distant engines hummed in the background. Not Apaches this time, just trucks on the highway. But to Cole it was close enough. After Reeves left, Cole took a long walk down to the edge of town where the land opened into a wide stretch of desert. The wind was dry and sharp, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and iron. He stood there for a long while, watching the endless blue, and then he heard it. Faint at first, then rising, the deep, rolling thrum of rotors. He turned his eyes skyward. A single Apache swept across the horizon, low and fast, sunlight glinting off its blades. It wasn't coming for him. It was just passing by. But the pilot, whoever they were, banked slightly as they passed overhead. A salute in motion, a gesture understood only between those who had once shared the sky. Cole's throat tightened. He lifted a hand in return. For a moment, man and machine existed in silent communion, bound by memory, loss, and something too old for words. Then the helicopter disappeared into the horizon, leaving nothing but dust and the slow, rhythmic echo of its passing. That night, in his small room above the garage, Cole wrote a letter. He didn't address it to anyone in particular, just to the next one. You'll meet men who wear power like armor. Don't envy them, it's borrowed. Real strength doesn't roar. It endures, it forgives. And sometimes it flies. He folded it neatly and left it inside the drawer, beside an old photograph of him and Blake, two young men grinning inside the cockpit, unaware of how heavy the future would become. Years later, long after Cole was gone, a new pilot found that letter during a renovation. The word spread quietly through the ranks. And soon, before every flight, before every mission, the instructors would tell the story of the old veteran who had once been mocked, who rose above laughter and turned it into silence. They spoke of a colonel who learned humility the hard way, and a sky that bore witness to both shame and grace. And somewhere beyond that story, somewhere the desert met the clouds. The legend of Daniel Cole lived on, not as a tale of defiance, but as a reminder that dignity, once awakened, can humble any rank, that a man who has lost everything can still teach others how to rise, and that sometimes the loudest lesson in the world is spoken through the quiet flight of a single Apache, soaring toward the horizon, carrying the heart of an old soldier who had finally found peace.